Your husband's lunch order from Miso Fusion has been delivered to 742 Evergreen Terrace. The notification popped up on my phone while I was in the middle of a work meeting, a routine alert from our shared food delivery account that I would have normally ignored. Except Ethan was supposed to be having lunch at his downtown office today. And 742 Evergreen Terrace wasn't his office address. It wasn't anywhere I recognized. Rachel, can I get back to you on those projections this afternoon? Something just came up. I ended the Zoom call abruptly, staring at the notification. My thumb hovered over it, heart suddenly racing. One tap opened the delivery details: spicy tuna rolls, gyoza, and 2 miso soups, ordered for 2 people. An innocent explanation existed, surely. A lunch meeting at a client's house? A co-worker's place? But Ethan hadn't mentioned anything about leaving the office today. In fact, he'd specifically said he was swamped with meetings and would be working through lunch. I copied the address into Google Maps. It was a residential area about 20 minutes from Ethan's office, an apartment complex called The Willows. The reasonable thing would have been to text him, to ask who he was having lunch with, to give him a chance to explain. Instead, I found myself changing out of my work-from-home sweatpants into jeans, grabbing my car keys, and typing the address into my GPS. Something cold and heavy settled in my stomach as I backed out of our driveway, something that felt terrifyingly like certainty. On the drive over, I called Lily's Bakery and ordered Ethan's favorite dessert, chocolate lava cake. "I'll pick it up in 10 minutes," I told them. "It's a surprise for my husband's lunch." What was I doing? Creating a plausible excuse to show up unannounced? Or giving him the benefit of the doubt? The line between suspicion and intuition had suddenly blurred, leaving me navigating by some deeper knowledge I wasn't ready to acknowledge. The Willows was a mid-range apartment complex, nicer than our first place together, but not luxury by any means. Building 7, apartment 42B. I parked, bakery box in hand, and made my way up the exterior stairs, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. Outside 42B, I hesitated. What if this was innocent? What if it was a co-worker's place and I appeared like a stalking, untrusting wife? I almost turned around, almost. Then I heard it, Ethan's laugh. That distinctive, full-bodied laugh I'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. The laugh that belonged in our home, in our shared memories, in our private jokes. Not behind this stranger's door at 1:17 on a Tuesday afternoon. I knocked before I could lose my nerve. The laughter cut off. Silence. Shuffling sounds. Then the door opened. She was beautiful. Glossy dark hair, flawless skin, startled brown eyes. And she was wearing Ethan's Northwestern University sweatshirt, the worn gray one with the frayed cuffs that I'd tried to replace last Christmas, but he'd insisted on keeping because it was broken and just right. "Can I help you?" she asked, one hand still on the door, body positioned to close it quickly if needed. Words failed me completely. I stood frozen, bakery box clutched in white-knuckled fingers, staring at this stranger wearing my husband's clothes in an apartment I'd never seen before. "Megan, who is it?" Ethan's voice called from inside. The sound broke my paralysis. "Food delivery," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "I brought dessert to go with the sushi. Mind if I come in?" Her eyes widened in confusion, then horrified recognition as she looked more closely at my face. She knew exactly who I was. "Kristen?" Ethan appeared behind her, his expression transforming from relaxed to panic-stricken as our eyes met. He was wearing sweatpants and nothing else. His hair mussed, a smudge of what looked like lipstick visible on his neck. "Surprise!" I said, the word dropping between us like a stone in still water, ripples of consequence already spreading outward. And just like that, with a simple food delivery notification and a spontaneous drive across town, my marriage shattered into pieces I wasn't sure could ever be put back together again. Ethan and I met at a mutual friend's Halloween party 4 years ago. I was dressed as Wonder Woman. He was Clark Kent mid-transformation to Superman, dress shirt open to reveal the iconic S. We spent the entire night in the corner talking, ignoring everyone else, discovering a connection that felt immediate and undeniable. "I've never met anyone who gets my weird sense of humor before," he'd said somewhere around 2 a.m., looking at me with wonder. I fell for him completely that night, for his intelligence, his ambition, his way of making me feel like the most fascinating person in any room. Our courtship was a whirlwind, dating by Thanksgiving, exchanging I love yous by Christmas, moving in together by spring. We married 18 months after meeting, a garden ceremony with 75 guests, string lights, and personalized vows that made both our mothers cry. The honeymoon in Costa Rica was perfect, hiking through rainforests during the day, falling asleep to the sound of waves each night. We talked about our future children, the house we'd buy when Ethan made partner at his law firm, the trips we'd take as we grew old together. "You're it for me," he'd whispered on our last night in Costa Rica, "the beginning and end of everything that matters." The first year of marriage was an adjustment, but largely happy. We worked hard, me at my marketing job, him at the law firm where his hours seemed to constantly increase. We spent weekends exploring our city, trying new restaurants, hosting small dinner parties for friends. We had routines and inside jokes and dreams that seemed entirely within reach. The subtle shifts began around our first anniversary. Ethan started working later, coming home exhausted, too drained for the conversations that had once stretched late into the night. His firm had taken on a major case, he explained. The pressure was enormous, but temporary. Just a few months of pushing hard, then things would calm down. "I hate that I'm missing so much time with you," he'd say, kissing my forehead before falling into bed. "It won't be like this forever, I promise." I believed him completely, supported him unconditionally, rearranged my schedule to accommodate his unpredictable hours, kept dinner warm, learned not to feel rejected when he was too tired for intimacy. Then came the business trips, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. Always brief, always essential. I'd drive him to the airport, pick him up when he returned, listen to his stories about difficult clients and hotel room service. "This is the last one for a while," he'd say each time. "Things are finally settling down." But they never did. If anything, his absences increased. Weekend work became routine, late-night calls that he took in the other room, texts that made him smile in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Still, I trusted him, completely, naively. When friends gently suggested his schedule seemed extreme, I defended him. When my mother asked if everything was okay between us, I insisted we were fine, just busy with our careers. When my own intuition whispered that something had changed, I silenced it with rationalizations and remembered promises. We were approaching our second anniversary when the pandemic hit, forcing a temporary shift to remote work. For a few weeks, we were suddenly together all the time in our small house. The constant togetherness revealed cracks I'd been too busy to notice. His irritability, my growing resentment, conversations that stayed safely in the shallow end of connection. Then his firm announced they were returning to the office earlier than most. Essential business operations, impossible to conduct remotely. Ethan seemed relieved to escape our home, while I continued working from the spare bedroom that doubled as my office. It was during this period that the shared food delivery account became our norm. With restaurants closed for dining in but open for delivery, we'd order lunch, sometimes separately, sometimes together. The app would notify both of us when orders were placed or delivered, a minor convenience that neither of us thought twice about. Until today. Looking back now, from the horrifying vantage point of standing in a stranger's doorway watching my husband's face drain of color, I could see all the signs I'd chosen to ignore. The late nights, the business trips that didn't quite match his firm's client locations, the gradual withdrawal of his attention, the new cologne I didn't pick out, the sudden attention to fitness, the passwords changed on his phone for security purposes. I'd been so determined to be the supportive, understanding wife, so convinced that our love was exceptional, unbreakable, so certain that Ethan would never betray me because he'd promised, standing in that garden surrounded by string lights and witnesses, to forsake all others. Yet here we were, Ethan shirtless in another woman's apartment at lunchtime on a Tuesday. The woman, Megan, wearing his beloved sweatshirt like she had the right to it, and me still clutching a ridiculous bakery box containing chocolate lava cake, the world crumbling around me while I struggled to remain standing. Kristen, I can explain, Ethan said, his voice unnaturally high. It's not what it looks like. But it was exactly what it looked like, and some part of me had known it all along, had simply been waiting for the evidence to become too obvious to ignore. Actually, I said, finally finding my voice, I think it's precisely what it looks like. The only question is how long it's been happening and whether she's the only one. In movies, the betrayed spouse always throws the evidence in the cheater's face immediately, hurls accusations, demands answers, perhaps breaks something valuable for dramatic effect. But standing in that doorway, bakery box now crushed in my grip, I found myself unable to proceed with a confrontation. Not yet. Not when shock had rendered me incapable of processing what was happening. You know what? I don't want to hear it right now, I said, cutting off Ethan's stammered explanations. I need to think. Don't come home tonight. I turned and walked away, ignoring his calls of, Kristen, wait! Each step down the concrete stairs required conscious effort, my body moving mechanically while my mind remained frozen in disbelief. In the car, I sat motionless, key in the ignition but engine silent. My phone buzzed repeatedly, Ethan calling, then texting when I didn't answer. I turned it off completely. The drive home passed in a blur. Inside our house, the home we'd chosen together, decorated together, filled with photos of our life together. I moved from room to room like a ghost, seeing everything through new eyes. The framed wedding photo on the mantel, the dent in the wall from when we'd tried to move the couch ourselves, the throw pillows he'd complained were uncomfortable but I'd kept because they matched the color scheme. All of it suddenly felt like props on a stage, set dressing for a play I hadn't realized we were performing. When the initial shock began to subside, something cold and focused took its place, a need to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. If Ethan had been living a double life, there would be evidence beyond a food delivery notification and a woman in his sweatshirt. I started in his home office. The desktop computer was password protected, but I knew the password, his father's birthday, plus his high school jersey number. He'd used the same combination for years, despite my suggestions to use something more secure. Now I was grimly grateful for his predictability. His email yielded nothing suspicious at first glance: work correspondence, fantasy football updates, newsletters. But in the archive folder, I found dozens of emails to and from ML88, messages with no subject lines containing only times and confirmation replies. The most recent was from 3 days ago, Tuesday, 12:30, I'll bring lunch. I moved to his browser history, mostly cleared but with his Google account showing searches for Best Date Restaurant Seattle and How to Hide Text Messages. There was also a saved map location for the Willows Apartments, added to his favorites 6 months ago. 6 months. While I'd been planning our second anniversary celebration, he'd been saving the address of his mistress's apartment. Financial records came next: credit card statements, bank accounts, Venmo history. Most seemed ordinary, but there was a pattern of cash withdrawals on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always $100 or $200, always from ATMs near his office. Money that wouldn't leave an obvious trace. I found a receipt for a necklace I'd never received, purchased 3 weeks before my birthday. A hotel charge in Portland on a weekend he'd claimed to be at a conference in San Francisco. Restaurant bills for 2 at places we'd never visited together. Each discovery was another blow, another piece of evidence that the man I'd married had been systematically deceiving me for months, possibly longer. My phone, when I finally turned it back on, showed 27 missed calls and 18 texts from Ethan. It's not what you think. Please let me explain. I never meant to hurt you. She doesn't mean anything to me. We can fix this. Tell me where you are. I'm worried about you. The progression from denial to concern was almost laughable. I ignored them all and instead called my best friend Claire. He's been cheating, I said when she answered, the words strange and painful in my mouth. I caught him. At her apartment, she was wearing his clothes. Claire didn't ask for details, didn't question if I was sure. I'm coming over, she said immediately. Don't do anything until I get there. While waiting for Claire, I continued my investigation, moving from the digital to the physical. In the back of his closet, behind winter coats we rarely used in Seattle's mild climate, I found a small gym bag containing a change of clothes, extra toiletries, and a second phone. Basic, not smart, the kind that wouldn't sync to our cloud account or leave a digital trail. The phone contained only one contact, M. The text history confirmed what I already knew: regular meetings, mostly during lunch hours or after work, occasionally on weekends when he'd claimed to be working or attending professional events. The earliest message was from 7 months ago. 7 months of deception while I'd been supporting his career, maintaining our home, planning our future. 7 months of me believing we were building something together while he was systematically undermining the foundation. Claire arrived as I was scrolling through the messages, my vision blurred with tears I hadn't realized were falling. "Oh, honey," she said, taking one look at my face and pulling me into a hug. "I'm so sorry, so sorry." "I feel so stupid," I whispered against her shoulder. "All the signs were there, I just didn't want to see them." "You're not stupid," she said firmly, guiding me to the couch. "You trusted your husband. That's what you're supposed to do in a marriage." For the next hour, I showed her everything I'd found, laying out the evidence of Ethan's double life, like a detective building a case. Claire listened, occasionally offering validation or asking clarifying questions, but mostly just bearing witness to the systematic dismantling of my marriage. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I'd finally run out of words. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to pack my bags and disappear. Part of me wants to change the locks and burn his clothes in the backyard. But mostly, I just want to understand why. Why her? Why this? Why throw away everything we built together?" "Those are questions only Ethan can answer," Claire said gently. "And from my experience watching friends go through this, the answers are rarely satisfying. Usually just excuses and justifications that don't actually explain anything." She was right, I knew, but I still needed to hear whatever explanation he might offer, if only to confirm that this wasn't somehow a massive misunderstanding, a scenario so unlikely it bordered on fantasy. As Claire helped me pack an overnight bag, we both agreed staying at her place was healthier than remaining in the house filled with memories. My phone rang again. Ethan. But this time, instead of ignoring it, I answered. "Yes," my voice was ice. "Kristen, thank God. Where are you? Are you okay? We need to talk about this." "Yes, we do," I agreed coldly. "Tomorrow, my lunch break. We can meet at Westside Park near the fountain, 1 o'clock. "Tomorrow, but..." "Tomorrow or never, Ethan. Those are your options." A pause. "Okay, tomorrow at 1. I'll be there." I ended the call without saying goodbye. Claire raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Public place," I explained, "so I won't be tempted to cause a scene, and giving myself time to process everything before facing him." "Smart," she approved. "And what about tonight?" "Tonight," I said, zipping the overnight bag closed with finality, "I'm going to figure out what I want from that conversation, because I'm pretty sure I already know everything I need to know about what kind of man my husband really is." As we left the house, I placed the slightly crushed bakery box on the kitchen counter with a note. "Dessert is served. Hope it was worth it." A petty gesture, perhaps, but in that moment, with my world collapsing around me, it felt like the first step toward reclaiming some small measure of control. Westside Park was busy with lunchtime visitors when I arrived the next day. Office workers eating takeout on benches, mothers with strollers navigating the paths, elderly couples feeding the ducks that populated the small pond. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal against the chaos of my internal landscape. I'd chosen this location carefully, public enough to discourage dramatic outbursts, but with enough ambient noise for privacy, a neutral territory where neither of us held home field advantage. After a sleepless night at Claire's, I'd spent the morning at work on autopilot, unable to focus on marketing strategies when my personal life had imploded so spectacularly. My boss had noticed my distraction but accepted my vague explanation of family emergency without pressing for details. Now, sitting on a bench by the fountain, watching the water cascade in predictable patterns, I rehearsed what I wanted to say. Not accusations. Those were unnecessary given the evidence. Not emotional appeals. Those felt hollow now. just specific questions that might help me understand not just what had happened, but what it meant for the future I'd thought was certain. Ethan arrived 5 minutes early, looking haggard in a way that might have prompted sympathy under different circumstances. The dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd slept as poorly as I had. Good. He hesitated before sitting beside me, maintaining a careful distance. "Thank you for meeting me," he began. "This isn't a favor," I cut in. "This is me giving you one opportunity to be honest after months of lies. Don't waste it on meaningless pleasantries." He flinched at my tone but nodded. "You're right, I'm sorry." "How long?" I asked, getting straight to the point. He looked down at his hands. 7 months, since the Simpson case. She's a paralegal at the firm. The confirmation squeezed the air from my lungs despite my mental preparation. 7 months of deception while I'd been planning our future, supporting his career, believing his excuses. Was she the first? Ethan's hesitation told me everything before he even spoke. No, there was someone before. It ended before Megan. 2 affairs in less than 2 years of marriage. The revelation should have hurt more, but I was already numb, already prepared for the worst. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. The one Claire had warned would yield no satisfying answer. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's complicated." "Simplify it for me," I replied coldly. "I don't know, Kristen. It wasn't about you. You didn't do anything wrong. I got caught up in the attention, the excitement, the newness of it. And then one bad decision led to another, and suddenly I was living this double life I didn't know how to escape." "You could have chosen not to start in the first place," I pointed out. "You could have talked to me if something was missing. You could have suggested counseling. You could have asked for a divorce before betraying everything we promised each other." "I know," he admitted. "I know all of that. But I didn't want to lose you, and I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "So instead you chose to betray me in the most fundamental way possible while pretending everything was fine. That wasn't about protecting me, Ethan. That was about protecting yourself from consequences." He didn't deny it, which was perhaps the first honest moment between us in months. "Does she know about me?" I asked. "Yes, from the beginning." The confirmation that Megan had willingly participated in destroying my marriage, had seen our wedding photos on his phone, had listened to his excuses for leaving her apartment to return to our home. It ignited a fresh wave of anger. "So you both just, what, decided my feelings didn't matter? That our vows were irrelevant? That the life we built together was worth throwing away for lunchtime hookups and stolen weekends?" "It wasn't like that," he protested weakly. "Then what was it like, Ethan? Explain it to me. Help me understand how you justified lying to my face every single day for 7 months. My voice had risen despite my determination to remain calm. A couple on a nearby bench glanced over curiously. I lowered my voice, leaning closer. "Did you ever consider what this would do to me when I inevitably found out? Did you think about the trust you were destroying, or was it all just about what you wanted in the moment?" "I wasn't thinking clearly," he admitted. "I compartmentalized. When I was with you, I tried to be the husband you deserved. When I was with her, I pushed away thoughts of what it meant for us. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd end it before you ever found out." "And yet you didn't." I shook my head in disgust. "What would have happened if I hadn't seen that delivery notification? How long would it have continued? Another month, another year, until she got tired of being the other woman, until you found someone new to replace her?" Ethan had no answer, his silence more damning than any explanation. "Here's what I don't understand," I continued, the words spilling out now that the dam had broken. "You had options, Ethan. If you were unhappy, you could have said something. If you wanted out, you could have left. You chose to lie. You chose to cheat. You chose to make me complicit in my own humiliation by keeping me in the dark." "I never wanted to hurt you," he repeated, sounding like a broken record. "But you did," I replied, my voice finally cracking. "You've been hurting me for 7 months. I just didn't know it until yesterday." We sat in silence then, the fountain's steady splash providing background to the conversation that was ending our marriage as decisively as a judge's gavel. "What happens now?" Ethan finally asked, his voice small. I'd considered this question all night, weighing options, imagining scenarios. In movies, there was often a dramatic reconciliation, a tearful promise to change, a journey toward forgiveness. But those were fictions. The reality was much colder, much clearer. "I've already contacted a lawyer," I said, the words strange in my mouth. "I'm filing for divorce. Claire will come by the house this weekend to collect the rest of my things while you're at work. I'd appreciate it if you weren't there." "Divorce?" He looked genuinely shocked, as if he'd expected some other outcome. "Kristen, we can work through this. People recover from affairs all the time. We could try counseling." "No," I interrupted firmly. "This isn't a momentary lapse in judgment, Ethan. This is 7 months of sustained deception with multiple women. This is you fundamentally breaking the contract of our marriage while I remained faithful to it. There's nothing to save here." "You don't mean that," he insisted, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, standing up from the bench. "I do mean it. That's the difference between us. When I make vows, I keep them. When I say something, I mean it. You might want to try it sometime." I turned to leave, then paused, one final question burning in my mind. Was any of it real? Did you ever actually love me, or was I just convenient, a socially acceptable wife to come home to between affairs? The hurt in his eyes seemed genuine, but I no longer trusted my ability to read him. "Of course I loved you," he said. "I still do. That's what makes this so complicated. I never stopped loving you, Kristen." "That's the saddest part of all this," I replied, strangely calm now that the hardest words had been spoken. "Your version of love included lying to my face every day for 7 months. That's not love, Ethan. I don't know what it is, but it isn't love." I walked away then, ignoring his calls to wait, to talk more, to consider alternatives. The time for talking had ended. The time for decision had arrived. As I left the park, passing couples holding hands and friends laughing together over shared lunches, I felt an unexpected lightness beneath the grief. The burden of uncertainty had been lifted. The path forward was clear, if difficult. The marriage I thought I had was gone, but perhaps it had never existed at all, except in my imagination and our carefully staged photos. The weeks following my discovery and confrontation with Ethan unfolded in a blur of practical necessities and emotional aftershocks. I moved into Claire's spare bedroom temporarily while looking for an apartment of my own. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Vanessa with extensive experience in divorce cases, filed the initial paperwork and advised me to limit direct communication with Ethan. "Everything through lawyers now," she recommended. "Emotional conversations just complicate clean separations." The practicalities were surprisingly straightforward. We'd been married less than 2 years, had no children, and maintained separate retirement accounts. The house would be sold, the proceeds divided according to our contributions to the down payment and mortgage. The furniture would be split or sold. The wedding china neither of us had particularly wanted would go into storage until someone decided to claim it. Dismantling a marriage, it turned out, was largely an administrative task. Forms to complete, assets to divide, legalities to address. It was the emotional unraveling that proved more complex. I cycled through feelings with dizzying speed, rage that left me screaming into pillows when alone in Claire's apartment, grief that arrived without warning in grocery store aisles or during mundane work meetings, humiliation when telling family and friends that my marriage was ending because my husband had been unfaithful, and occasionally, in quiet moments between the stronger emotions, relief that I had discovered the truth before investing more years in a relationship built on deception. Sleep became elusive, disrupted by dreams where I kept discovering new betrayals, or worse, where everything was fine and Ethan and I were happy. Those dreams left me waking with tears on my pillow, mourning the future I'd thought was certain. Friends rallied around me with varying approaches to support. Claire was my practical guardian, helping with apartment hunting and joining me for lawyer meetings. My college roommate Jenna offered emotional catharsis through wine-fueled venting sessions. My coworker Marcus provided welcome distraction with movie nights that strictly avoided romantic plots. Family reactions were more complicated. My parents, married 40 years and believers in working through problems, initially encouraged counseling before fully understanding the scope of Ethan's betrayal. My brother was furious, threatening a confrontation I had to actively discourage. My grandmother simply said, "You deserve someone who chooses you every day, not just when it's convenient," wisdom that became a mantra during difficult moments. Ethan's attempts at communication evolved as the reality of our separation solidified. The initial flood of apologetic texts and calls gave way to practical questions about the house sale and furniture division. Eventually, he sent a handwritten letter, a 10-page confessional exploring his own weaknesses and failures that read more like therapy notes than a meaningful apology. I read it once, then filed it away, recognizing that his need for absolution wasn't my responsibility to fulfill. 2 months after that fateful food delivery notification, I signed a lease on a small but bright apartment across town, a fresh start with no memories attached to its walls. The day I moved in, surrounded by boxes and the pieces of furniture I'd claimed in the division, I experienced my first genuine moment of forward-looking optimism. This space was mine alone. These choices were mine to make. This future, uncertain as it might be, belonged to me. That night, sitting on my new couch with takeout balanced on my lap, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge a truth I'd been dancing around. I didn't just hate what Ethan had done. I hated who he had revealed himself to be. Someone capable of sustained deception. Someone who could look me in the eyes and lie without hesitation. Someone whose moral compass had such a profound defect. The man I'd fallen in love with, I realized, had never actually existed. He'd been a carefully constructed facade, a performance designed to win approval and affection without the inconvenience of genuine accountability. This recognition, painful as it was, proved oddly liberating. I wasn't grieving the loss of something real, but the death of an illusion I'd mistaken for reality. I'd been beating myself up for missing signs, for not seeing through the deception sooner. But how could I have known? I'd operated under the assumption that marriage meant shared truth, a reasonable expectation that Ethan had deliberately subverted at every turn. The question that had tortured me initially, why did he do it, gradually lost its power. The answer, I came to understand, had nothing to do with me and everything to do with his own character deficiencies. No explanation he could offer would ever be adequate because the problem wasn't in the circumstances, but in who he fundamentally was. 3 months after Discovery Day, Claire convinced me to reactivate the dating app I'd deleted after meeting Ethan. Not to find your next husband, she insisted, but to remember that there are other people in the world, that your story didn't end when his true colors showed. I resisted initially, convinced I wasn't ready. The thought of trusting anyone after such profound betrayal seemed impossible, but eventually I created a new profile, honest about my recent separation, clear about seeking only casual conversation initially, authentically myself in a way that felt both vulnerable and empowering. The first few exchanges were awkward, the first coffee date even more so. I found myself watching for inconsistencies, analyzing responses for hidden meanings, skeptical of basic courtesies I would have accepted without question before. "You have relationship PTSD," my therapist explained during one of our weekly sessions. "Your trust was violated in a fundamental way. Your hypervigilance is a protective response, not a permanent condition." She was right, I knew. The heightened suspicion, the instinctive withdrawal from emotional vulnerability, the constant expectation of betrayal, these were natural responses to trauma, not character flaws or permanent limitations. 4 months after Discovery, I received an unexpected text from a number I didn't recognize. "Kristen, this is Megan. I know you have every reason to hate me, but I wanted to apologize directly for my role in hurting you. There's no excuse for what we did. I've ended things with Ethan and am moving to Portland next month. I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused you." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. The apology couldn't undo the damage, couldn't restore what had been broken. But it acknowledged responsibility in a way Ethan's self-focused explanations never had. After careful consideration, I replied simply, "Thank you for the apology. I wish you well in Portland." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a closing of that particular chapter, a release of energy I'd been expending on anger towards someone who, while complicit in my pain, hadn't been the one who'd made vows to me. That night I dreamed of the ocean, vast, powerful, but somehow calming in its constancy. I woke feeling lighter than I had in months, as if something rigid within me had finally begun to soften. The following weekend, I invited friends over to my new apartment for the first time, a small dinner party that felt like a housewarming and a life-warming rolled into one. As we shared food and wine and laughter, I caught myself experiencing genuine joy, unencumbered by the shadow of recent pain. It wasn't the end of healing. That journey would continue for months, perhaps years, but it was evidence that healing was possible, that betrayal, while transformative, needn't be defining. That life, incredibly, continued even after the unimaginable occurred. 6 months after the food delivery notification that changed everything, I faced another delivery, this one expected but no less emotionally charged. The final divorce papers arrived via certified mail, requiring my signature to confirm receipt. I signed for the package but let it sit unopened on my kitchen counter for hours, strangely hesitant to take this final legal step. Not because I had any doubts about ending the marriage, but because signing these documents meant formally acknowledging that a significant chapter of my life, one that had begun with such hope and ended with such pain, was irrevocably closed. When I finally opened the envelope and reviewed the papers with their clinical language and blank signature lines, I felt an unexpected sense of ceremony. This deserved more than a hasty scribble between work emails. It deserved acknowledgement. I changed into comfortable clothes, poured a glass of wine, and created a small ritual space at my dining table. One by one, I placed meaningful objects around the divorce papers. The pen my parents had given me when I graduated college, a small stone I'd found on a beach during a solo weekend trip after moving out, a candle Claire had gifted me with a card reading, "Light returns after darkness." As I signed my name to the documents that would legally end my marriage, I spoke aloud the truths I'd gathered during these months of rebuilding. I deserve honesty, I deserve respect, I deserve a partner who values commitment as I do. I release what does not serve my highest good. I embrace my future with courage and hope. Silly, perhaps. Unnecessarily dramatic, possibly. But in that moment, it felt important to mark this transition with intention rather than treat it as just another task to complete. The healing process had been neither linear nor predictable. Some days brought unexpected setbacks, running into a former colleague who didn't know about the divorce and asked cheerfully about Ethan, finding his old t-shirt mixed in with my gym clothes, receiving a wedding invitation addressed to both of us from friends who hadn't heard the news. Other days brought surprising progress. The first morning I woke without immediately remembering the betrayal, an entire dinner with friends where I didn't once mention my divorce, the realization that I'd gone a full week without checking Ethan's social media accounts. My therapist called these healing milestones, markers of progress to be celebrated rather than dismissed as insignificant. Healing from betrayal isn't about forgetting what happened, she explained. It's about the experience losing its power to define your present moment. One particular milestone came 7 months after Discovery Day, when I attended a work conference in Chicago, my first professional trip since the separation. At the evening networking event, I met Daniel, a marketing director from Toronto with kind eyes and a quick wit. Our conversation flowed easily, touching on industry trends before wandering into books, travel, and eventually personal histories. When he asked if I was married, I answered honestly, recently divorced, still finding my feet but getting there. In previous months, this disclosure had often created awkwardness or prompted unwanted advice. Daniel simply nodded and said, "That takes courage. Endings and beginnings both require a special kind of bravery." We talked until the event concluded, exchanged business cards, and connected on LinkedIn the next day. Nothing romantic, nothing complicated, just an authentic connection that left me remembering that the world was still full of interesting people, genuine conversations, and possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. Back home, I continued the work of rebuilding. I painted my apartment walls colors I loved without considering anyone else's preferences. I joined a weekend hiking group, challenging my body while clearing my mind on mountain trails. I reconnected with old friends I'd unconsciously distanced during my marriage. recognizing how I'd gradually narrowed my world to accommodate Ethan's preferences and schedule. 9 months after discovery, I received a text from Ethan. "The house closes next week. Wanted to know if there's anything still there you want before I finish clearing it out." I considered ignoring the message, but decided on direct clarity instead. "Nothing left there I need. Good luck with the closing." His response came quickly. "I'm sorry for everything, Kristen. I know that doesn't change anything, but I am truly sorry for what I did to you, to us." After careful thought, I replied, "I appreciate you saying that. I hope you've learned from this experience for your sake and anyone else who might trust you in the future." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. That felt premature, possibly unnecessary for my own healing. It was acknowledgement of his apology without accepting responsibility for easing his guilt. A closure conversation that required neither emotional reopening nor bitter recrimination. The exchange left me thoughtful but not destabilized, evidence of healing I hadn't fully recognized until that moment. 10 months after discovery, I was promoted at work. Recognition of the increased focus and creativity I'd channeled into professional growth while my personal life was in repair. The team celebration included a toast from my boss acknowledging my grace and perseverance during a challenging year, words that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I was proud of myself, I realized. Proud of surviving something I'd once thought would destroy me. Proud of rebuilding without becoming bitter. Proud of maintaining my fundamental belief in goodness, despite experiencing its absence in someone I'd trusted completely. That evening, I updated the journal I'd been keeping since the separation, a record of the journey from devastation to recovery that had become a trusted companion. Flipping through earlier entries revealed a progression I hadn't fully appreciated while living through it day by day. From raw pain, I can't stop imagining them together, can't stop wondering if he ever really loved me or if everything was a lie from the beginning. To anger, why am I the one who has to rebuild while he just continues his life with her? Where is the justice in this? To determination, I refuse to let his choices determine my future. I refuse to become someone who can't trust again. To cautious optimism, had a moment today where I felt genuinely excited about the future. No idea what it holds, but for the first time, that uncertainty feels like possibility rather than terror. To emerging wisdom, maybe the gift in this pain is the chance to rebuild more intentionally, to create a life that reflects who I truly am, rather than who I thought I should be in relation to someone else. Reading these entries, I recognized that healing hadn't erased the experience or minimized its impact. The betrayal had changed me, made me more cautious, certainly, but also more self-aware, more intentional about my choices, more attuned to authenticity in myself and others. 12 months after Discovery Day, an anniversary I acknowledged quietly with a solo dinner at a restaurant I'd always wanted to try, but Ethan had dismissed as too experimental. I received an email from Daniel, the marketing director I'd met at the Chicago conference. "Going to be in Seattle next month for meetings. Would you be up for coffee or dinner? Would love to continue our conversation about integrated marketing approaches, or books, or anything really." I smiled at the blend of professional pretext and personal interest, appreciating the space it gave me to engage comfortably. After brief consideration, I replied affirmatively, suggesting a restaurant near my office. As I pressed send, I realized I was looking forward to the meeting without anxiety, without excessive analysis of intentions or outcomes, without the weight of recent betrayal coloring the interaction. It might be nothing. A professional connection, a friendly conversation, a single dinner with no sequel. Or it might be something, the beginning of a friendship, a collaboration, possibly even, eventually more. Either way, I was approaching it as myself, whole, healing, cautious but not closed, marked by experience but not defined by it. That night, I lit a candle on my balcony and quietly acknowledged the journey of the past year, the pain that had nearly broken me, the friends who had helped put me back together, the work I had done to rebuild myself stronger than before. The betrayal would always be part of my story, but it was no longer the story itself. And that, I realized, was the true measure of healing. 2 years after the food delivery notification that had revealed my husband's double life, I stood on a mountain summit overlooking Puget Sound, the city of Seattle tiny in the distance below. The hiking group I joined during my rebuilding phase had evolved into a close circle of friends who celebrated birthdays with challenging trails instead of restaurant dinners. "Summit photo," called Marcos, setting up his phone on a rock and gesturing for everyone to gather. As we posed, arms around each other's shoulders, faces flushed from exertion and joy, I felt a profound sense of belonging to this moment, to these people, to the life I had carefully constructed from the ruins of what came before. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had come in small increments, in daily choices to move forward rather than remain stuck in pain or bitterness. It had required conscious effort, professional support, and the patience of friends who understood that healing follows its own timeline. Daniel, the marketing director from Toronto, had indeed become something more than a professional connection. After months of cross-country friendship built through video calls and occasional in-person meetings when business brought either of us to the other city, our relationship had gradually evolved into a romance marked by transparency and careful consideration. "I'm still working through trust issues," I'd warned him early on. "There will be times when my past experiences make me question things that shouldn't be questionable." "That makes sense," he'd replied. "All I can do is be consistent and honest. The rest will either resolve with time or it won't, but I think it's worth finding out." His understanding approach neither minimized my concerns nor treated them as insurmountable obstacles. Instead, he offered exactly what I needed most: patience without pressure, honesty without expectation. The relationship progressed slowly, deliberately, each step forward a conscious choice rather than an assumed progression. When he eventually relocated to Seattle for a position with a tech company, we maintained separate homes despite spending most nights together, a boundary I needed and he respected. Alongside this new relationship, other areas of my life flourished. The promotion I'd received during my rebuilding phase led to another, placing me in a leadership role I might never have pursued while married to Ethan, whose career had always implicitly taken precedence. My circle of friends expanded beyond the support system that had carried me through divorce, now including people who knew me only as I was, not as I had been before the betrayal. I'd even cautiously reconnected with certain shared friends from my marriage, those who had shown genuine care for my well-being rather than defaulting to remaining neutral in ways that effectively condoned Ethan's behavior. The wisdom gained through this journey accumulated gradually, revealing itself in moments of clarity that often arrived when I least expected them. While helping a newly separated colleague navigate her first weeks of upheaval, I found myself saying, "Pain like this changes you permanently. The trick is making sure it changes you into someone you still recognize and respect." During a therapy session marking my graduation from regular appointments, my therapist asked what insight had been most valuable. "Learning that forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened," I replied after careful thought. "It's about releasing its power to control my future. And sometimes the person who most needs forgiveness is yourself, for not seeing what wasn't fully visible, for trusting someone who wasn't trustworthy." On a rare accidental encounter with Ethan at an industry event, our first face-to-face meeting since the divorce was finalized, I experienced neither the emotional collapse I had once feared, nor the bitter triumph I might have expected. Instead, I felt a calm detachment, nodding politely across the room before returning to my conversation, his presence noted but not defining. These moments collectively formed a new understanding of betrayal and recovery, not as a single traumatic event followed by a linear healing process, but as a fundamental realignment of how I understood relationships, trust, and my own resilience. The most meaningful transformation, I came to realize, wasn't in how I viewed Ethan or even relationships in general. It was in how I viewed myself. Before the betrayal, I had unconsciously defined myself largely through my marriage, measuring my success partly through the achievement of traditional milestones, wedding, homeownership, the projected children, and suburbia that would presumably follow. My identity had been quietly subsumed into us, my individual desires often negotiated into compromise without full awareness of what I was surrendering. After rebuilding, I recognized myself as whole and complete on my own, capable of deep connection without dissolution of self, able to love without abandoning my own needs and boundaries. The relationship with Daniel enriched my life rather than defining it, adding joy to a foundation already stable. This shift manifested in countless small ways. I became more direct about my needs rather than hoping they would be intuited. I grew comfortable with stating preferences without apology or justification. I developed a clearer sense of personal non-negotiables, behaviors and patterns I would not accept in any relationship, romantic or otherwise. The wisdom earned through pain transformed my approach to trust as well. Before, I had trusted naively, assuming honesty until given reason to doubt. Now I trusted deliberately, watching for consistency between words and actions, remaining alert to discrepancies without becoming paranoid. Trust isn't about certainty, I explained to a support group I occasionally visited, now as a mentor rather than a member in crisis. It's about making informed choices about who deserves your vulnerability, recognizing that trust is always a risk, but one worth taking with the right people. Perhaps the most profound transformation came in my understanding of closure. In the early days after discovery, I had desperately wanted answers that would make sense of the betrayal, explanations that would somehow justify or at least clarify the pain I was experiencing. With time and distance, I came to recognize that meaningful closure rarely comes from external sources. It emerges from within, from the meaning we create from our experiences, the boundaries we establish to protect our well-being, the stories we tell ourselves about what happened and what it signifies. 2.5 years after Discovery Day, as Daniel and I discussed moving in together, I found myself able to approach this new milestone with eyes wide open, aware of risks, but unwilling to let past betrayal determine future possibilities. What I learned, I told him during a weekend getaway to Victoria, is that being betrayed doesn't mean I made a mistake in trusting. It means someone else made a devastating choice. The vulnerability required for real connection will always involve risk. The alternative, never trusting again, is the greater loss. He took my hand across the table, understanding the significance of this perspective. Thank you for being brave enough to try again, not just with me, but with life in general. 3 years out, life had assumed a new normal so complete that days sometimes passed without any thought of that pivotal food delivery notification. When memories did surface, they arrived without the searing pain of earlier times, more like viewing scenes from someone else's life than reliving my own trauma. I occasionally heard about Ethan through mutual connections. He had moved to Chicago, changed firms, begun dating someone new. These updates registered as neutral information rather than emotional triggers, evidence of how completely I had moved beyond the gravitational pull of that relationship. On the anniversary of Discovery Day, I no longer commemorated the pain, but instead celebrated the rebuilding, treating myself to small, meaningful experiences that acknowledged the journey. The third year, that celebration included sending a donation to a local shelter supporting women rebuilding after difficult relationship endings, a way of transforming personal pain into broader purpose. As I stood on that mountain summit with friends, watching the sun illuminate the landscape below, I reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from devastating loss, a deeper understanding of myself, more authentic connections with others, the discovery of strength I hadn't known I possessed. The betrayal had broken something fundamental, my basic trust in the world as a safe and predictable place. But in rebuilding from those fragments, I had created something stronger, more intentional, and ultimately more authentic than what had existed before. Not despite the betrayal, but because of how I had chosen to respond to it. The food delivery notification that had sparked this journey remained, ironically, both the worst and best thing that had happened to me, the ending that enabled a more genuine beginning, the breakdown that preceded a breakthrough, the loss that ultimately led to discovery. Not of another person's deception, but of my own capacity for resilience, growth, and renewed trust in a world where betrayal remains possible but need not be defining. That, perhaps, was the most transformative wisdom of all. If you've connected with this story, please like and share it with others who might be navigating their own journey through betrayal or difficult endings. Your comments about similar experiences or questions about rebuilding trust are welcome. This community has become an invaluable resource for many walking parallel paths. And if you're currently in the midst of fresh pain, please know that while healing isn't linear and rarely feels possible in those first raw moments, each small step forward matters. The story you're living now is painful, but it's not the end of your story, just a difficult chapter in a narrative that continues to unfold. Thank you for listening.